A criminal court case involving a surgeon accused of botching several surgeries. Former neurosurgeon Christopher Duntsch was stripped of his medical license.
I knew that something was wrong and I wanted to hurt him.
It was the winter of 2011 when life took an unexpected turn for Kelly Martin and her husband Don. The 54-year-old woman from Garland, Texas, was getting Christmas decorations from the attic when she tripped and hurt her back. It was so terrible that she had to go to the hospital. The pain didn't go away even after physical therapy, muscle relaxants, and painkillers.
She had done some exercises and some physical therapy, and my mother's not the one to complain, ever.
In the end, Kelly's doctor said that surgery was the best thing to do. Since she was an elementary school teacher, she planned the surgery for March 2012, trying to recover during the break. Dr. Christopher Duntsch, the neurosurgeon, told the couple that the surgery would be simple and usual and that it would only take 45 minutes. Kelly and Don put all of their faith in the doctor, who was clear and reassuring, exactly the kind of doctor you'd want by your side. But as the time went by in the waiting room, Don couldn't get rid of the horrible feeling that something was wrong. He was worried and didn't know what would happen to his wife after the promised 45 minutes passed. Finally, Dr. Duntsch came out and said that the surgery had been successful, though Kelly was still in some pain. Then, Dr. Duntsch said it was possible that Kelly would need to be moved to the ICU, or even have to stay overnight. There were red flags right away in Don's mind. Something wasn't adding up. Even though hours had passed, the medical staff kept working hard on his wife. Kelly's girls joined their worried father in the waiting room. They were both confused by how serious the situation was. Finally, the doctor from the intensive care unit and Dr. Duntsch came out to tell everyone the terrible news. Kelly had died.
Dr. Duntsch never said a word and kind of looked down at the floor, not even giving us eye contact.
The Martin family later learned that Dr. Duntsch had cut Kelly's artery during the operation, which caused her to bleed out. Their whole world fell apart in an instant, throwing them into a nightmare they could never have imagined. They had no idea that this terrible event was just the beginning. 33 of the 38 surgeries Dr. Duntsch had done in the 2 years before this one went wrong. Patients were left with long-term pain, lifelong disabilities, or the inability to walk. He left behind a trail of broken lives. Patients and other doctors alike were desperate for answers and wanted to know who was responsible. As the startling truth came to light, a troubling pattern emerged. All of these patients shared the same surgeon, who some have now labeled a sociopath. This led to the surgeon being charged with aggravated assault with a dangerous weapon, his own surgical tools. Mary Efford was one of these people. She had pretty normal surgery while she was under Dr. Duntsch's care. The first surgery at Baylor Plano seemed to go well, but a few months later, Duntsch argued that Mary needed another surgery. At this point, Dr. Duntsch had switched to working at a place called the Dallas Medical Center. In just 1 week, he underwent 3 surgeries. The third one would eventually lead to him being tried on criminal charges for what he did. But what did Dr. Duntsch know a lot about? Duntsch had both an MD and a PhD from the University of Tennessee. He was trained as a neurosurgeon and a spinal surgeon. He was an expert in the complicated field of spine surgery. The terrible things happened during Mary Efford's second surgery. Mary's health had gotten so bad after the botched surgery that she needed the help of another surgeon, Dr. Henderson, to try to fix the problems. With years of experience, Dr. Henderson was called in to do what is called a revision surgery. This is a process that looks at the problems that happened after the first surgery and tries to fix them. During the revision, Dr. Henderson recorded his findings on video, which showed a scary truth. Dr. Duntsch had apparently ignored the right way to do surgery. The video showed a lot of mistakes, like pins that were put in the bone in the wrong place and didn't seem to be doing anything. As the study into Dr. Duntsch's surgery progressed, a concerning pattern of mistakes and carelessness became clear. Although some surgeries took longer than expected and didn't seem to have any big problems, others were harmed by a lack of care. Over time, Dr. Duntsch's surgery skills became more and more unpredictable, which made people very worried about his skills and judgment. One of the worst examples was his best friend, who became quadriplegic after Dr. Duntsch severed a vertebral artery during the procedure.
The thing I remember is not being able to move
However, even worse things happened after that. For example, he left surgical sponges inside cuts or worked on the wrong vertebrae. The second case showed how confusing his mistakes were. He did the right surgery on the wrong part of the spine, which made the whole thing pointless and could have been dangerous. It wasn't that Dr. Duntsch kept making the same mistake. Instead, his mistakes were different every time, and each time they were more confusing than the last. Even though everything was going crazy, one thing was still clear. Many of the surgeries that had the worst results were actually pretty simple processes with low risks when done right. More worries are raised when one thinks about the seriousness of the situation and the processes Dr. Duntsch was messing up. At this point in their lives, surgeons like Dr. Duntsch would have probably done tens of thousands of these kinds of surgeries, honing their skills and knowledge almost to perfection. Still, Duntsch was failing at even the most basic spine surgeries for no apparent reason, which was very bad for his reputation as a doctor. In order to figure out where this strange pattern came from, the people who were looking into the case looked into Dr. Duntsch's past and found clues from when he was a medical student. Early accounts say that Duntsch was mostly interested in studies, especially when it came to stem cells. He had even helped start a company called Dysgenics that was meant to do studies. His classmates said he was a smart student who didn't have any major problems in school. But one troubling fact came to light. Duntsch had been put on leave because of drug problems while he was in medical school. The surgeon who had done the revision surgery on Mary Efford, Dr. Henderson, decided to look into Duntsch's past further on his own. In the process, he found out the disturbing fact that Duntsch had been banned before, which made people even less sure about his ability to practice. Concerning the drug abuse problems Dr. Duntsch had while he was in medical school, it was still not clear what substances he had problems with. However, as his bad behavior at work got worse, it became clear that drugs and alcohol had a strong hold on him. There were disturbing reports that bottles of vodka and traces of cocaine were found in his office, and that nurses and aides had to flush the cocaine down the toilet in secret to hide how bad things were getting for him. In this crazy scene, an interesting person called Kimberly Morgan, who had been hired at first as Dr. Duntsch's surgical helper, stood out. Their friendship quickly went beyond professional limits though. Morgan first showed up at Duntsch's office wearing revealing Daisy Dukes, fresh from a spring break trip to the party island of San Pedro. As Morgan and Duntsch's relationship grew, a complicated web of lies began to form. Duntsch was meeting someone else while living with his girlfriend, Wendy Young, and their 2 young children who had just moved to Texas. There were still a lot of unknowns about Duntsch and Morgan's relationship, but it was clear that they spent a lot of time partying together. Morgan's disappointment grew as more patients died on the operating table, and it became clear that terrible mistakes were happening over and over again. She could no longer explain these events as just random chances. In the end, Morgan's morals forced her to speak out, and she bravely testified against Dr. Duntsch in his trial, revealing the dark truths that had been going on behind the scenes of his once famous medical practice. Reports always paint a picture of Dr. Duntsch's meetings with patients before surgery as being full of unwavering confidence that was almost arrogant. There is a moving scene where Jackson's performance as Duntsch reassures a couple that he is the best surgeon in all of Texas for the procedure they need. Michelle Sugar, the district attorney who tried Duntsch's case and saw him in action during the trial, said that this false sense of absolute confidence was a big part of how he behaved.
Word was out in the neurosurgical community. Everybody knew that there was a bad doctor on the loose.
When it came to Jerry Summers, one of Duntsch's best friends, this unwavering faith in his own skills turned into something even more sad. When Summers had back problems that wouldn't go away, he turned to his old friend Duntsch and trusted that his surgical skills would help him feel better. On the other hand, the result was nothing short of terrible. When Summers woke up from the surgery, he was screaming in terrible pain. The doctor had done such a bad job that he almost cut Summers' head off. Sadly, Summers never got his movement back. He died this past summer, and his life will never be the same because of his trusted friend's mistakes. Complications during surgery are always a possibility, but the trends that were showing up in Duntsch's operating rooms were hard to explain. Finally, the full extent of Duntsch's lying became clear when the investigative podcast team looked into Jerry Summers' case again last summer, just a few months before he died. Summers' ex-girlfriend, who knew Duntsch directly, at first thought that the terrible results were just a mistake, which shows how much trust they had in the disgraced surgeon. Summers' condition was only temporary, and Duntsch told him over and over that he would be able to walk again. This went on for months or even years. Summers chose to believe these empty claims because he was close with the person and couldn't handle the harsh truth that his life had been changed forever. Duntsch was finally caught and had his medical license taken away before the truth finally hit. As this tragedy plays out, it's impossible not to ask, were there no defenses in place? As more and more proof of Duntsch's wrongdoing came in, like sponges left inside patients and surgeries done on the wrong spine, no one raised an alarm. Such obvious mistakes could not have gone ignored or unreported for a long time, could they? Some doctors, like Dr. Robert Henderson and Dr. Randall Kirby, started to notice that Duntsch's patients were consistently and seriously having bad outcomes after surgery, even though the details of his mistakes may not have been brought to everyone's attention right away. As this trend became harder to ignore, they did what they should have done and told the Texas Medical Board about Duntsch. But even though they tried to sound the warning, the board didn't do anything about Duntsch, which none of them could explain. The hospital's decision to let Duntsch retire rather than fire him meant that they were not legally required to report his misconduct, which made their inaction worse. Because of this, Duntsch was able to easily move from one healthcare center to the next. Potential new employers couldn't see his path of destruction because they weren't aware of the growing list of malpractices that had happened elsewhere. People can't help but wonder why the Texas Medical Board didn't say anything, even though there was so much proof that Duntsch wasn't qualified. Was there really no other case of a surgeon causing so much pain to so many of their patients, either on purpose or just by being careless? The depressing truth is that Duntsch's case was the first of its kind. As the investigation went on, it became clear that he was the first doctor in the country to be charged with a crime for something that happened during surgery. It is very hard to prove criminal purpose in these situations, because doctors are usually given a lot of legal protection while they do their jobs, no matter what happens. Given this, it was even more impressive that District Attorney Michelle Schubert eventually filed charges against Duntsch. It was a turning point in holding doctors responsible for serious mistakes. Before Duntsch was charged, there were many chances to take away his medical license, but the systemic protections in place were woefully inadequate. It looks like the American medical system is set up to protect doctors from pointless malpractice suits rather than find and get rid of people who really put patients at risk. This is a sobering realization that means the system's goals need to be re-evaluated in a big way. Even though there was more and more proof that Duntsch wasn't doing a good job, justice moved very slowly. Henderson and Kirby were fed up with not being able to get anything done, so they were brave enough to tell the press about their problems. This brought attention to the disturbing pattern of bad outcomes, including 2 patient deaths that had happened under Duntsch's care. Because more and more people were looking into it, his hospital powers were finally taken away, and then his medical license was taken away too. At the same time, this small amount of responsibility didn't stop Duntsch from doing more harm. Since he could still look for work in other states, bringing criminal charges against him became necessary so that he couldn't keep doing what he was doing without getting caught. As the court case against Duntsch went on, a scary picture of his mind became clear. Duntsch reportedly wrote a confusing email while high on cocaine in which he called himself a cold-blooded killer and said he was ready to leave this world and the space between God and something else. In an act of grandiose delusion, he said that he existed somewhere between the worlds of God, Einstein, and the Antichrist. This was a troubling statement about himself that showed how mentally unstable he was. This damaging piece of evidence, which was given to the prosecutors by Kimberly Morgan, was shown to the jury as a possible way to figure out what Duntsch was thinking and feeling, but the real reasons he did what he did were still unknown, and they may never be fully explained. Some people thought Duntsch's disturbing and self-congratulatory speech showed how his mind was falling apart, but no one knew for sure what drove him. Others thought that his words showed a cruel desire to hurt people, and that he was using surgery as an excuse to kill someone. Others, though, came up with a more complex explanation. A surgeon who was incredibly cocky and didn't know how negative his own thoughts were. Some people think Duntsch really thought he was a world-class surgeon and didn't realize that his poor surgery skills were killing and hurting patients. Ultimately, this important question, one that went to the heart of Duntsch's mind and intentions, was still not fully answered. When Duntsch went to court, lawyers had the difficult job of putting together all of his offenses into a single, strong case. The main question in the case against Duntsch was about one patient, Mary Efford. This is similar to how the notorious Al Capone was caught lying on his taxes. District Attorney Michelle Schubert used Texas's laws against adult abuse in a very smart way. She knew that such charges could lead to sentences that would last decades, which she thought would be a fair punishment for Duntsch's crimes. Schubert thought that if his victims were already serving life terms because of what he did, then he should also get the same punishment. Duntsch was only found guilty of one charge, which was performing surgery on Mary Efford, who was over 65 years old at the time. While the prosecutors were not allowed to present direct proof, they were able to use a small number of other cases and patient testimonies to show the jury the wider pattern of harm done by the disgraced surgeon. Duntsch's case was praised as a legal landmark because it was the first time a doctor had been found guilty of trying to hurt a patient on purpose during surgery. While we don't yet know what the full effects will be, Dr. Kirby, one of the whistleblowers who helped bring Duntsch to justice, said that the case has already been used as a warning example in law school.
After the Kelly Martin case, I called the Texas Medical Board and I said, listen, we've got real issues with this surgeon.
This newfound knowledge might lead to a change in how the medical community handles responsibility. It should serve as a stark reminder that even the most privileged professionals can face the consequences of their actions. The jury gave a strong verdict. We, the jury, having found the defendant Christopher Daniel Duntsch guilty of injury to an elderly individual as charged in the indictment, unanimously assess his punishment at confinement in the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for life. The victims and their loved ones who had been through unbearable pain at Duntsch's hands finally felt relief and closure with this important choice. The verdict was a victory for everyone whose lives the disgraced surgeon's actions had permanently altered, even though the case was primarily about Mary Effort's ordeal. After the events, these brave people said they hoped their horrifying experiences would serve as a wake-up call to the medical community and the organizations that let Duntsch's reign of terror happen. They promised that such a serious breach of the holy oath to first do no harm would never happen again. The case of Dr. Death is a chilling reminder of the vulnerability within our systems. Subscribe to Secret Sleuths for more investigative documentaries that expose the hidden truths behind power, influence, and even life itself.